The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. After years of living with roommates and bouncing between cheap rentals, I finally signed the lease for a one-bedroom unit in a creaky old building on the edge of the city. The rent was low, too low, considering how close it was to downtown, and the landlord seemed almost too eager to get the paperwork signed. Still, when I moved in with a couple of boxes and a secondhand couch, I felt something close to pride. The cracked plaster, the crooked cabinet doors, the faint smell of dampness in the hallway, it didn't matter. This was my place. The building itself was small, 3 floors, 6 apartments in total. The landlord, Mr. Peters, lived on the ground level, and the rest of us were stacked on top of each other. My unit was on the 2nd floor, tucked into the left-hand corner. The stairs groaned every time I climbed them, and the hall lights flickered no matter how many times the bulbs were replaced. It felt like the kind of building that had history, not the glamorous kind, but the quiet, forgotten sort. The kind that left a mark on the walls and lingered in the air. The first night was uneventful, aside from the noises. I assumed an old building like this would be full of creaks, pipes knocking, and neighbors shifting around. But the sound that kept me awake was different. Footsteps directly above me. Slow, steady pacing from one end of the ceiling to the other. Back and forth. Over and over. At first, I thought nothing of it. Someone else settling into their unit, maybe with insomnia. But the pacing didn't stop. Even when I checked the time at 3 a.m., the footsteps were still there, dragging slightly, like someone was limping. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, I ran into Mr. Peters in the lobby while heading to work. He looked the same as when I first met him, a short, wiry man in his late 60s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. I casually mentioned the upstairs neighbor, asking if they kept unusual hours. He froze. For a split second, his expression flickered, like I had said something he wasn't expecting. Then he waved it off, muttering that the unit above me was vacant. Been empty for months, he added, already turning away. I laughed awkwardly, waiting for him to explain, but he didn't. He just shuffled back into his office, leaving me standing there with a knot forming in my stomach. That night, I tried to tell myself it was just the building settling. Maybe stray animals somehow got into the walls, or the pipes rattled in a way that sounded like footsteps. But when I turned out the lights, the pacing began again. Back and forth. A heavy, deliberate stride that made the ceiling groan with each pass. At one point, the steps paused directly above where I lay in bed. For a long moment, silence pressed down on the room. So complete, I thought maybe it was finally over. Then came 3 sharp knocks against the ceiling, as if someone knew exactly where I was and wanted me to know they were there too. Didn't sleep the rest of that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body clenched tight, waiting for the next sound. The knocks never came again, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt heavy, like the quiet was being forced on the space around me. At dawn, I finally got up, groggy and nauseous, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that tasted like ash. I told myself I was being ridiculous, stress, imagination, the exhaustion of moving. Still, when I left for work, I avoided looking up at the 3rd-floor windows. The day at the office blurred into meaningless tasks, but the back of my mind stayed in that apartment. Every time someone walked by my desk, I caught myself glancing at their shoes, hearing phantom echoes of the pacing above me. By the time I got home, I was ready to collapse. Instead, I found a piece of paper shoved halfway under my apartment door. No envelope, just a folded sheet, yellowed at the edges as though it had been around for years. Inside, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. Don't stay here. I froze in the hallway, paper trembling in my hands. My first thought was that it was a prank. Maybe some other tenant didn't like newcomers, or wanted me gone for some petty reason. But there was something in the uneven handwriting that unsettled me. It looked rushed, desperate, like the person who wrote it hadn't had time to explain more. I tucked it into my pocket, locked the door behind me, and tried to convince myself it was meaningless. That night, I left the TV on just to drown out the silence. That it worked until a little after midnight. The static hum of the television filled the room, and I dozed off on the couch. Then I heard it again, the footsteps, pacing, slow and deliberate, right above me. Only this time, I noticed something new. Between steps, there was a faint dragging sound, like a heel scraping across the floor. The rhythm was wrong, not random, but measured, almost like the pattern of someone circling something. My skin crawled, and I turned the volume up louder. The sound didn't stop. It just carried on, steady, patient, as if the thing above me knew I was listening. That I don't remember deciding to do it, but I grabbed a broom from the kitchen and struck the ceiling. The bang echoed through the room. The footsteps stopped immediately. Relief washed over me, shaky and short-lived, because just as I started to lower the broom, 3 slow knocks answered from above, louder than before, deliberate, and exactly in rhythm with the ones I'd heard the night before. The next morning, Megan convinced herself she'd overreacted. Cruises had security cameras, trained staff, and plenty of people around. Surely she wasn't in any real danger. Still, as she made her way to the breakfast buffet, she couldn't shake the memory of the slow, deliberate knock on her door. The corridor outside her cabin seemed longer than usual, lined with identical doors that gave no hint of the people behind them. 2 uniformed crew members passed her, speaking softly in a language she didn't recognize. As they walked by, she noticed one of them glancing over his shoulder at her. Not just a quick glance, but a long, assessing look, as though measuring her reaction. Breakfast should have been a comfort. Sunlight pouring through panoramic windows, the clatter of plates, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. But Megan's attention kept snagging on small details. A waiter refilling water glasses seemed to be lingering at her table just a beat too long. A young couple at the next table whispered rapidly to each other and kept glancing toward the entrance. And when she finally stood to leave, she caught sight of the man from the night before, the one in the dark suit, seated alone near the back. His hands were folded neatly on the table, his plate untouched. He didn't blink when their eyes met. This time, Megan didn't wait to see if he would vanish. She turned and left. She decided to spend the afternoon exploring the ship. Deck 7 had several quiet lounges and a library that smelled faintly of old paper despite the ocean air. In the library, she struck up a brief conversation with an older British woman named Helen, who was knitting in the corner. When Megan mentioned seeing a man in a dark suit, Helen's needles paused mid-click. Tall, thin, doesn't eat, Helen asked, her voice low. I've seen him too. 3 years ago, on this very ship. Different cruise. He was watching people then as well. Before Megan could ask more, another passenger entered, and Helen's demeanor instantly brightened, as if she hadn't said anything at all. That evening, Megan noticed a change in the ship's atmosphere. The wind picked up, rattling the glass doors on the outer decks. The hallways seemed dimmer, shadows stretching farther than they should. She passed a security camera mounted above the stairwell and had the sudden, irrational feeling that it wasn't connected to anything at all. Back in her cabin, she locked the door and tried to distract herself with a movie on the tiny wall-mounted TV. Halfway through, the screen flickered, briefly showing what looked like live footage of the ship's exterior decks at night. In the grainy image, a lone figure stood at the railing, unmoving, staring out at the sea. She shut off the TV, her heart pounding. The ship's engines throbbed beneath her feet, steady and relentless. But she couldn't shake the growing sense that the ocean majesty wasn't just carrying her across the Caribbean. It was carrying something else, something that didn't belong among the living. Don't know how long I stood there, hand trembling just inches from the doorknob. The breathing on the other side was steady, slow, and wrong, like each inhale scraped through something thick, wet, and heavy. It wasn't the casual sound of a neighbor falling asleep on the other side of a thin wall. It was deliberate enough that I became convinced it was listening to me, matching me. Every time I held my breath, it seemed to pause, then resume when I exhaled. The realization rooted me to the spot. Suddenly, a floorboard inside the room shifted with a deep groan. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on that doorknob. It twitched. Not much, just a small, deliberate rattle, like someone inside was testing it. A pulse of cold air seeped through the gap beneath the door and licked against my ankles. My courage broke, and I bolted down the hallway, the echo of my own footsteps slamming against the walls. I didn't stop until I was locked inside my apartment, my back pressed hard against the door, chest heaving that I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wind had made the knob shake. Maybe the breathing was my imagination, amplified by my nerves. I repeated those excuses to myself like prayers, but none of them explained the cold air or the way the breathing had synced with mine, perfectly timed, as though mocking me. I left the lights on that night and sat upright on the couch, trying to stay awake. The ceiling was quiet, almost too quiet, like the thing above me knew I was listening. The silence itself became unbearable. Sometime after 2 a.m., my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a notification, motion detected, living room. My stomach dropped. I hadn't set up any security system. No cameras, no sensors. Confused, I picked up the phone and froze. A grainy, black and white image filled the screen. The photo showed my apartment's living room. My living room. Same sagging couch, same blinds, same unpacked boxes. Except I wasn't in the photo. Instead, a tall, blurred figure stood in the far corner, just at the edge of the camera's view. Its head was tilted toward the ceiling. I dropped the phone, heart hammering against my ribs. The photo had no timestamp, no sender. It just appeared. I scrambled to pick it up again, scrolling through my notifications, my gallery. Nothing. The picture was gone, like it had never been there. Just when I started to think I'd finally lost my mind, a new sound drifted from above me. Not footsteps, not pacing, just a single, muffled thud directly over my couch. I didn't go into work the next day. My body felt like it had been wrung out, my nerves shredded after the photo that appeared on my phone. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, a prank, some kind of app one didn't remember installing. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the image, it was the timing. The way it had arrived right when the apartment above me went silent, as though whatever was there wanted me to see it. I made coffee, but my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the mug. Around noon, a knock startled me. Not from the ceiling this time, but from my front door. I almost didn't answer. But when I peeked through the peephole, I saw a woman, mid-30s, tired eyes, hair pulled into a loose bun. She was holding a grocery bag against her chest and glanced nervously over her shoulder as if making sure she wasn't being followed. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. "You're the new tenant?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and she whispered, "You hear it too, don't you?" My throat tightened. I didn't answer at first, but my silence was enough for her to continue. She introduced herself as Claire, from the other unit on my floor. She said she'd lived here 5 years, and the apartment above mine had always been a problem. "People move in sometimes," she said, voice low, "but they don't last. Days, weeks at most. And when it's empty," she trailed off, glancing up at the ceiling as though afraid to speak the rest. "It's worse when it's empty." Her knuckles whitened around the grocery bag. I tried to press her for details, but she shut down quickly. "Don't go back up there," she warned, stepping closer to whisper now. "Whatever you do, don't open that door. It doesn't matter if you hear it. Don't open it." Before I could reply, she turned and hurried down the hallway, her shoes clicking too quickly against the warped wood. I watched her retreat, a knot twisting in my stomach. She wasn't crazy, at least, she didn't seem to be. And her fear wasn't exaggerated. It was the kind of fear that lives in someone's bones, carved deep by experience. That night, I tried to follow her advice. I curled up on the couch, keeping every light in the apartment blazing. Midnight crept by in silence. For the first time in days, no pacing, no dragging. Just silence. I almost believed the worst was over, until my phone buzzed again. Same notification, motion detected, living room. My chest locked up. I forced myself to look. This time, the photo was clearer. The same blurred figure stood in the corner, but its head wasn't tilted up anymore. It was tilted down, staring directly at the couch where I was sitting. I stared at the photo on my phone for what felt like hours, my pulse crashing in my ears. The figure was clearer this time, the shape of its shoulders distinct, the tilt of its head unmistakable. It was standing there, in my apartment, yet when I looked up from the screen, the corner was empty. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I told myself it wasn't possible. There was no camera, no way for these images to exist. But denial only went so far. The evidence was right in my hands, burning into me with every pixel that I forced myself to stay awake, too afraid of what I might wake up to if I slept. Around 3 in the morning, the silence broke, not from the ceiling, but from the corner of my living room. The faintest scrape, like a foot dragging across the floor. My head snapped toward the sound, but there was nothing there. The lamp's lights stretched into the corner, illuminating only shadows. Yet I felt it. A weight in the air, a pressure that made my skin prickle. My eyes watered from staring too hard, and that's when I saw it. Something in the light itself. The shadow of a figure, faint, stretched against the wall where nothing stood to cast it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body refused to move. The shadow twitched, as if aware I was watching, then slowly began to straighten. Its head tilted in the same jerking motion I had seen in the photo. I scrambled backward, bumping into the coffee table and sending my phone clattering to the ground. The sound broke the moment, and the shadow froze. The corner was empty again, but the silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was waiting that I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted the salt on my lips. My breaths came too fast, chest heaving as though the air was thinner than it should be. Then, in the quiet, came 3 slow knocks. Not from the ceiling this time. From the inside of my bedroom door. I turned my head, dread clawing its way down my spine. The door was closed, as it had been all night. The knocks came again, heavier this time, rattling the frame. Something was in there. Gathering what little courage I had, I crept toward the bedroom. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. The silence stretched, so thin it felt ready to snap. Then, just as my fingers brushed the metal, a whisper slipped through the crack. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like the sound of breath shaping my name. The whisper at my bedroom door hollowed me out from the inside. My hand stayed frozen on the knob, every nerve screaming at me to pull away. But before I could react, the door creaked slowly open on its own. The light from the living room spilled inside, cutting a narrow strip across the bed and dresser. At first, the room looked empty, just the familiar mess of unpacked boxes and rumpled sheets. But the air was colder, heavy enough that every breath felt like dragging ice into my lungs that I told myself not to look toward the far corner, but my eyes betrayed me. At first, I thought it was another shadow, darker than the rest, standing too still. Then it moved. A slow, jerking step forward, like its limbs didn't bend the way they should. My legs buckled, and I stumbled backward into the hallway, nearly tripping over my own feet. The figure stepped again, closer to the edge of the light. Its head was tilted too far to one side, as though its neck had been snapped, and though its features blurred like smoke. I knew without question it was staring straight at me that I wanted to run, but my body refused. Every inch of me was locked in place as the thing reached the threshold of the door. Its height filled the frame, brushing the top, its shoulders unnaturally broad. It didn't step out into the hall. Instead, it leaned forward, its face dipping into the strip of light. For the first time, I saw its mouth, or something like one. Not lips, not teeth, but a gaping stretch of black that quivered like torn fabric. From that void, the whisper came again, unmistakable this time. My name, dragged out in a voice that was both low and shrill at once, vibrating in my bones. That broke me. I bolted. I didn't think, didn't look back. I just ran, wrenching open my front door and sprinting barefoot into the hallway. My vision blurred as I barreled down the stairs, 2 at a time, until I crashed into the lobby. Mr. Peters was there, sitting behind his cluttered desk, startled out of his usual stupor by the sound of me slamming through the door. I tried to explain, tripping over words, choking on sobs, but he just shook his head. "You went upstairs, didn't you?" he muttered, voice heavy with something like regret. When I demanded answers, he wouldn't give me any. All he said, over and over, was the same phrase Claire had whispered the day before. "You should never open that door." His eyes, though, betrayed something deeper. He wasn't just warning me. He was mourning me, as if he already knew that by seeing what I had seen, by letting it step through, there was no undoing it. Mr. Peters wouldn't look at me after that night. I stayed slumped in the lobby chair until the sun came up, too afraid to go back upstairs. He sat across from me the whole time, chain-smoking, his eyes darting toward the staircase every time the floor above groaned. When morning light finally spilled through the glass doors, he stubbed out his last cigarette and said, almost to himself, "It always starts the same." I pressed him for more, desperate, begging. At first, he stayed silent, but eventually the dam broke. He told me the apartment above mine had been empty for years, officially. But before that, back in the 70s, a man had lived there. A recluse named Adler, who never left the unit except at night. Tenants had complained about noises then too. Pacing, dragging, strange knocks. One night, the sound stopped. The next morning, The landlord at the time found the door locked from the inside. When police forced it open, the room was empty. No Adler, no body, just his belongings, rotting food on the counter, and a faint stench that never really left. That I asked what happened after. Peters rubbed his face with trembling hands. People tried living there again. Didn't last. Every one of them left. Some ran screaming in the middle of the night. Others just disappeared. Packed up without notice, gone before dawn. The place has been sealed more often than it's been rented. But whatever Adler left behind, it doesn't stay locked in. His voice cracked as he added, "You never should have gone up there." The weight of his words pressed into me, but I couldn't stop the flood of images. The pacing, the photos on my phone, the whisper of my name. Adler wasn't gone. Or if he was, something of him remained, pacing those same endless circles, waiting for someone to open the door. And I had. I had let it bleed through. I stumbled back upstairs in daylight, thinking the sun would make it less terrifying. It didn't. My apartment door looked wrong somehow, the shadows leaning in on it, as if the air around it was warped. Inside, everything seemed untouched, except for the bedroom door. It was open wider than I'd left it, a sliver of darkness waiting inside. I refused to look at it. Instead, I sat on the couch, phone clutched in my hands, and scrolled through my gallery, desperate for proof. That's when I saw it. Dozens of photos I hadn't taken, all of my apartment from different angles. And in every single one, Adler's figure stood closer, clearer, like he had been waiting for me to notice. By the third day without sleep, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale and sunken. Every time I closed my lids, I saw the photos from my phone, the figure drawing nearer, frame by frame, until it felt like Adler's shadow was burned into my retinas. I wanted to leave, to run and never look back, but every attempt ended the same. My hand would reach for the doorknob, but then a weight pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, whispering in my ear, "Stay." Claire knocked that afternoon. Her face was drawn, her eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept either. "It's worse now, isn't it?" she whispered. I couldn't answer, but she stepped inside anyway, clutching a rosary in one hand. She told me she had seen Adler too, not with her eyes, but in dreams, standing in her doorway, waiting. "He doesn't want the apartment," she said, voice trembling. "He wants us." Before I could respond, her head snapped upward. Footsteps thundered across the ceiling, heavy, furious, shaking the light fixtures. Then silence. The silence didn't last. From the bedroom, the door slammed shut with such force the walls shuddered. Claire screamed, the rosary slipping from her fingers, beads scattering across the floor. My phone buzzed at the same moment, lighting up on the coffee table. Another motion alert. I almost didn't look, but some terrible part of me needed to. The photo showed my bedroom, the door wide open, Adler standing in the doorway. His shadowy form was sharper than ever before. Arms too long, head cocked, mouth stretching wide. The air thickened, pressing against my chest until I thought my ribs would crack. Then, slowly, the bedroom door creaked open in real time. My stomach dropped as Adler stepped through. Not a shadow this time, not a blur, but there. His form was darker than the room itself, every edge trembling as though reality struggled to contain him. His head tilted back, mouth splitting wider, a soundless scream tearing through the air like static. Claire collapsed to her knees, sobbing, whispering prayers that dissolved into choked gasps that I couldn't move. My body was locked, my vision tunneling until all I could see was him. Adler, or what was left of him, towered in the center of my living room, pacing in a slow, deliberate circle around the couch. The same circle I'd heard from the ceiling night after night. Each step shook the floor, dragging, deliberate, unending. Then he stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. His head snapped toward me, and in that instant, I knew. He wasn't pacing anymore. He was circling me. Adler's figure loomed closer, the air buckling around him like heat haze. Claire whimpered on the floor, her prayers collapsing into desperate sobs, while I stood rooted to the spot, lungs burning as if the room itself had stolen the oxygen. The gaping void of Adler's mouth vibrated, warping the air into a sound I couldn't hear but felt, like glass cracking in my skull. My vision blurred at the edges, black creeping in. I knew if I let go, if I surrendered even for a second, I'd never come back. Then, without thinking, I lunged for the scattered rosary beads. They felt hot in my hand, like they'd been left in the sun. Claire's tear-streaked eyes locked on mine, silently begging me to do something, anything. I clutched the rosary and shouted Adler's name. The figure stopped mid-step, its head jerking sharply toward me. The air grew heavier, darker, as if my words had torn open something that was never meant to be spoken aloud. The shadow's body flickered, warping in and out of focus. For a moment, I thought it might vanish. But then Adler moved again, faster than before, lunging toward me in a blur of darkness. Instinct took over. I hurled the rosary straight into the void of his mouth. The beads burst apart in the air, scattering like sparks, and the room convulsed. A scream, silent but deafening, ripped through the apartment, shaking the walls. Claire covered her ears, shrieking, as Adler's form twisted violently, splintering into shadows that tore themselves apart. The apartment lights blew out one by one, plunging everything into darkness. When the silence returned, it was absolute. No breathing, no pacing, no whispers. Just the sound of my own ragged breaths and Claire's sobs in the dark. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We waited until the sun rose and the faint gray light pushed through the blinds. Only then did we dare to leave. Mr. Peters didn't stop us. He just watched from his office, eyes hollow, and muttered, "It won't last." I never went back for my things. Neither did Claire. By the end of the week, the apartment had been emptied, the door to the third floor sealed again with fresh locks. But sometimes, late at night, I wake in my new place to the sound of pacing above me. Slow, steady, circling. And every time, without fail, it ends the same way, 3 sharp knocks.